So, Yeshua, we thank you for this day. We thank you for this Shabbat, and thank you that it's sunny out and that some of the water is drying up, especially in the fields, so that the farmers can get out and do other work that they need to before they're able to harvest the crops for this year. And so we praise you. We thank you for this day of rest that you have given to us, and that we can learn more about who you are and how you have designed us to live in this world, and that this world, for us who believe in you, is also part of the world to come, and that will be for eternity. So we thank you, we praise you. In Yeshua's name, amen. So today, you'll see I put the page first. Go to the tail in a bit. But the reason I chose this one was because I believed it best represented what I want to talk about, and how what's in our heart affects the decisions that we make. So we do what we do because we have made a choice, because we have decided in our minds that this is what we believe is the right thing to do, and so we should do it. And so the title is actually called "The Heart Precedes Action," and you noticed that if we go back there, there we go. It talks about the Lord is my strength and my shield. My heart trusts in him. He helps me. My heart leaps for joy, and with my song I praise him. Psalm 28, verse 7. And so essentially, all that is saying is that when David, who wrote this, he was, in his heart already, he was leaping for joy. How would that look? Can you actually see a heart? Can your heart leap for joy? I don't know if it can do that. If you can look inside somebody's body and be like, oh, look, your heart is actually leaping on its own, and you're not. Right? Essentially, you could see the heart of somebody if they're jumping. Your heart's going to move with you. Well, that would be interesting to see if the heart actually, when it moves, if it's like it's going up and down. We know it goes in and out, but up and down. So today we'll be discussing, I hope us to get a little bit clearer understanding of what that means. And in our last Hayesod, we talked about what Yeshua was doing, how Yeshua did not come to abolish the Torah, because essentially what I was trying to say in that as well was that he would be having to abolish himself. It's not just about the words that are on the paper that he gave to us. It also has to do with the character of who he is, because when Yeshua came, who's the living Torah, when he gave that to us, he wasn't just like, oh, these are some nice words that I want you to know about. He put a lot more thought. He put a lot more planning. It was really something that was, like we read about David's heart leaping, something that was from his heart to us, so that we could know how to live. And so, unfortunately, now this is why Yeshua had to come, was the Pharisees were changing what the Torah was teaching. I'll explain more about what I mean today regarding that. And How do we know this to be true? The Pharisees were doing this. What would and another thing we need to look at too is Yeshua did not come to abolish the Torah or do away with what the Pharisees taught regarding the Torah. So how do we know that this to be true? The first, and then what would Yeshua be saying about who he is if he was actually saying, "Oh, don't do what the what the Pharisees are saying"? We'll talk about more why what they were saying was somewhat correct. What would Yeshua then be teaching about Elohim if he was saying that? And what would Yeshua be allowing the Pharisees to do to him if he had in any way contradicted the Elohim of Israel? That they, from their heart, I do believe, I know ended up going away from him, but originally it wasn't their intent to disregard the Elohim of Israel, because they still considered themselves to be part of the Elohim of Israel. So, and I'll give an example what I mean, even in our own lives. What's going on this year regarding the month of June has been an exceptionally month full of rain, to the point where they're comparing it to 2013. Now, thankfully, we have not had that much rain. We're still coming at this point where it's causing the flooding. But myself, as you driving back to work often, I see fields where I go every day, and the rain, a lot of the rain is still sitting there, and the farmers are a little bit worried about their crops because it hasn't dried up yet. So I believe they are looking forward to a few days of dry weather, and like was mentioned in our prayer, so that they can finish what they need to, so that the crops will be ready in time, and they can bring them to market and hopefully make some decent money off of what the crop is worth. So, due to the amount of days the water was sitting in their fields, we can all feel some empathy with them. Though ours has caused a great number of mosquitoes, and they don't seem as bad in Calgary. Maybe that's only because we're in areas that there's a lot more cement and not so much just grass and dirt around. Our house in the mornings when I leave, even the other morning, we were all heading into Calgary, and this morning as well. You really have to move your arm by the doors before you open them, so the mosquitoes and the other insects will leave, because it's really nasty. So, and unfortunately, part of that was because I chose not to cut the grass earlier when we had a couple days of drier weather. So the grass got longer, and the mosquitoes found a place to go hide. So, for example's sake, regarding my yard in relation to our study on Yeshua and his teaching in our text, I had decided as soon as we get a dry day in June, I will get out and cut as much of our grass as we can. The day comes where my request is answered, and I come up with an excuse not to. So really, it seems as though I didn't want to cut it that day, because it was the case, because I didn't go out and cut it. So I would be showing myself to be untrustworthy, and that it was not my intention to cut the grass at that time anyway. I would have also shown to Elohim that I could not be trusted to make the right choice. And as I said earlier, the problem of having to deal with more mosquitoes. However, in the second scenario, it would have carried a greater burden. So due to my deliberate action not to go through with my previous course, in both cases, the thoughts started in the heart and mind before turning into action. We can learn here two things about that can be seen in my example of knowing the right course of action and then choosing the wrong one, the wrong action. Unlike Yeshua, so I showed myself to be not reliable, and this happened because my heart decided to wait for another day. Eventually I did cut it. And so here, likewise, should Yeshua have at first said he did not come to abolish the Torah, but to fulfill, then next, when he turned around to actually go against what he just said, so go against the Torah teachers of his day, he would have shown himself to be unreliable. Because the reality is that what they got is from the Torah. And they had just made other things more important. So he would have shown himself to be unreliable, the scriptures to be in contradiction, and what he gave us from the beginning for our walk as able to be changed when appropriate. So in essence, he could not be trusted in anything he does or says, because we know from the beginning, Elohim always said that when he says and does something, that we can trust it and that it will happen, like he said. So, and we see this, one example I'll start with is the example of in Leviticus 11 verse 45. There I have you can find the scriptures if you want to look them up. It says there, "For I am the Lord who brought you out from the land of Egypt to be your God. Thus you shall be holy, for I am holy." And in 1 Peter, so we jump to the apostolic scriptures or the New Testament, whatever you choose to call it, new writings, the apostolic writings, says there, "As obedient children, do not be conformed to the former lusts which were yours in your ignorance, but like the Holy One who called you, be holy yourselves, also in all your behavior, because it is written, you shall be holy." This is just one example of many we could find between both the Tanakh and the apostolic scriptures. And I took a quote from the Hayasot that I'm studying for this. Walter C. Kaiser Jr. attested this when he writes, "There is no contrast between what the Old Testament law required and what the New Testament enjoined." So what he's saying is that it's the same. We need to try and figure out why is it the same and why does there seem to be things that look on the outside contradictory when you first read them. The second point we notice is that he was not telling he was not telling the people what the Pharisees and Sadducees were teaching was wrong. Though many of us grew up in a Christian background, have been taught that Yeshua now changed the Torah from the physical being important to the spiritual is now important. We could spend a great deal of time on examples of these if we wanted to. However, some of the teaching would have been very overt, while most of it would be found to be subliminal. And I'm going to give an example of that I found. So my wife and I, we like to watch this show. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called recently Mind Your Language. And it's about this teacher, and he's teaching English as a second language. His people, one person's from China, one person's from Japan, one person's from Germany, one's from Spain, and one's from France, one's from India, one's from Pakistan. I think there's another one I can't remember. Oh, Italy, yes, one's from Italy as well. So you have these different people, and in this episode, there was also one from Scotland, are part of this class. And in the one with the Scottish man, the teacher asks his student to talk about the essay that he was to write on. And the essay that he wrote on had to do with Jesus and Mary. So while he's talking about it, he says that Jesus is a Roman Catholic. So I actually Googled, after I wrote this, I Googled to find out if it actually does talk about that on the internet. And yes, it does. You can find websites that talk about how some Catholics believe that Jesus eventually became a Roman Catholic. Of course, the Scottish man, thankfully, he took exception to this. So it's pretty funny. They start fighting, and the Spanish. So the Spanish man, he's like, no. We would say Yeshua. He says Jesus is Roman Catholic. No, he's not. He's a Jew. He's born a Jew. He lived a Jew. He's not a Roman Catholic. What are you talking about? So then how did this man, because clearly the Roman Catholics know that Jesus or Yeshua is a Jew. Can't say that they don't. How did some people eventually get this idea that Jesus became a Roman Catholic? So the word Catholicos, which means according to the whole or universal, is where we get, that's what Catholic stems from. That's the Greek word, Catholicos. And so I went to the online in the U.S. Catholic webpage. So if this is how you were being taught, right? So what happened was they started to be the ones who brought the good news in a way to the world, the entire world. They would have started to see, they would have started to kind of move him away from the idea of what he was originally, so that they could fit him in a sense into how they wanted him to be, because it would better suit what they're trying to advance. Because it's harder, right, especially too by this time, a lot of Christianity, which is where Roman Catholicism got started in, I believe, based on studies that I've done and books that I'm reading. Because of that, now it's better for me if I can get you to be something different than what you originally are, because now you will better represent what I want you to represent. If you're not, that's a problem. Even if I know that's not what you were originally. I don't want people to know about that. So I have to resell you, remake you into something, and keep the rest of you, don't talk about it, make sure people don't know about it. So that's how come you had this difference. So clearly the Scottish man, and he came from a Protestant background, was still being taught that Jesus, Yeshua, is a Jew. and the Roman Catholic subliminally, because they're not just out there telling you this stuff, but because of the idea of Roman Catholicism, he would have not been able to be like, well, this is why I know that, all of a sudden Jesus became Roman Catholic. He would just say no, because of his teaching. So Yeshua, therefore, could not have been seen as contradicting the correct understanding of the scriptures or what the religious leaders of his time were teaching. So because what the religious teachers, as I said earlier, it is from the Tanakh, and they would refer to the Tanakh often to validate their point. So they were using the words of Elohim that he embodies to help make their case. Because of this, he could not have been teaching anything new. That is, that the rabbis would not have had some sort of idea about. In fact, an argument, and this is from the same Hayasod, an argument can be made to show that there indeed was an understanding among the rabbis that was compatible with what Yeshua said. Only difference was he was only taking what was being taught and expounding in what the intent of the heart was before the action was committed. So, an example of that is in Genesis with this Cain and Abel. So I won't spend a lot of time, but I want to focus on the part of what Elohim says to Cain before he murders Abel. So what was he trying to correct? And the reality is he was trying to correct the heart, as he knew that Cain had a choice to make, and that's why he says to Cain, sin is crouching at the door. The door of what? What door? Obviously, we know it had to be the door to his heart. So he could open the door to sin, or he could open the door to what is right, to Elohim, make the right decision. Instead, he chooses to open his door to sin. So we know, of course, because he does that, not too long after that, he murders Abel. Then again, but then what does Elohim do after Abel is dead? He says to Cain, why is your heart downcast? Why are you feeling like this? And Cain says, showing that he didn't care about his brother Abel at all. He says, am I my brother's keeper? So again, his heart was not towards his brother or towards what was right. His heart was not towards being holy. Now, so this was, if you go to, I should turn there. There you go. You can see it. The first that's talking about first, Matthew 5:21-22, which is murder. Yeshua is talking about that, and he says how. Find it here. He says how, if in your heart you've already made this choice, then, right, eventually you will commit the very act. So, I'm going to be reading, this one is from the Tree of Life version. And you have heard it was said to those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever commits murder shall be subject to judgment. But I tell you, which is true, if you do commit murder, you will be subject to the judgment of man. But I tell you that everyone who is angry with his brother shall be subject to judgment, and whoever says to his brother, Racha, shall be subject to the council. And whoever says, "You fool," shall be subject to fiery Gehenna. So, right, Elohim, he's the one in charge of these other judgments that will come upon us if we continue to walk in this way. Even if we haven't committed anything, I can't be judged by a man, but God judges me already. And then he'll carry out that judgment accordingly later. And so the next one, you see there, it's on adultery. 5:27 to verses 28. And I have an example in that one as well, but I'll read first what it says here about that by Yeshua. And you have heard that it was said, "You shall not commit adultery." But I tell you that everyone who looks upon a woman to lust after her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So again, I'll go back quick to my first slide. There, right? See, the heart eventually leaps for joy, and then eventually he actually sings a song to Elohim. So here, the adultery eventually leads to the action. It doesn't just stop at a thought unless you decide, no, I'm not going to allow that. All right? You still have a choice to make. So my example here is about one of the most famous ones is on King David. And as we know, he chooses not to go out with the army at this time to fight. He stays. And so I'll just read what I wrote here. The example that I believe would have been known by most religious leaders at that time would have been King David, Uriah, and Bathsheba. Israel's out fighting against the children of Ammon and besieging Ramah. So Joab is there leading the troops, the general. King David had chosen to stay in the palace while he's up there. And it was interesting. So there's kind of an example for you and help get a better idea of how it would have looked like somewhat. Where I have an auntie that lives in the Strathcona area, and many of the houses there over the garage have this area with a little that you can actually walk up on top of, and you can bring a chair, you can sit out there, enjoy a little meal. In the more modern ones, it's generally below. So, something like that, right? He's walking out in his palace, he's on top, he can see a better view of everything, and he sees this beautiful lady. So he didn't just, it wasn't like that. It happened quickly, obviously. We know sin wants the action in sin needs to happen quickly, otherwise you're more likely not to do it. But David sees her, says in his heart, in his mind, "Oh, I want to take her." And if the kings back then had so much power, you didn't say no, right? Or it could be off with your head. So you can, make a case that what right did she have to be like, "No, king, I'm going to refuse you," and then the king be like, "Oh, that's fine." That would have been a slap in his face. So she comes, he sends people out to get her, brings her in. We know what happens. She gets pregnant, Solomon is born. The next thing he does, which is similar to Cain, though he doesn't do it himself, he makes sure Uriah, because he brings Uriah home, hoping Uriah will sleep with his wife. He says, "No way. My other friends, my soldiers that I fight alongside, they're out fighting. Why should I go in and be able to enjoy life? Well, they're not." So he doesn't go into the house, he stays out. So David doesn't like it, maybe tries to get him drunk, and he still does the right thing. And eventually David's like, okay, you go back, and tells Joab, you back off the line a little bit, so that way where the fighting is strongest, then he'll more likely get killed. And that's what happened. David didn't take the knife, but David still took the knife and told Joab, get somebody else to put the knife in for me. So in his heart, he had decided that he needed to get rid of Uriah, so that way people wouldn't find out what really happened. Now, thankfully, and I will mention this, I think it's important quickly though, is that thankfully Nathan comes in, shares a story about this wealthy person and then this unwealthy one. And the wealthy person has this lamb. Lamb represents something, right? Because back then, women were a little more, somebody you married, you had a little more ownership. So the lamb represents somebody that they owned. David doesn't like it because this lamb is the poor person has to kill their lamb for the wealthy person. David's like, no, that shouldn't have happened. And we know Nathan says, you're the wealthy person I'm talking about. David repents. Okay, so David, because David truly repented, it wasn't just like, oh, well, I don't want to lose something, so I better pretend. No, he repented from the heart. Okay, and he kept what Elohim had given him that he took from Saul. So Elohim sees the desire of the heart, and that is where he is drawing the sitter's attention to. That is Yeshua in Matthew 5:27 to 28, and as well as chapter 6 and 7. When the desire of the heart is correct, the action will be correct. And in the case of wanting to commit murder, no murder is committed, just like, right, no adultery. Some circumstances, inaction is the correct course of action. Inaction. What do you mean? Doing something is an action? Yes, sometimes doing nothing sometimes can be an action. Yes, it can. Action can be seen in a different way, right? It's the action you're taking is not to make it. So it's interesting. Well, in the case of Joseph, so we see the opposite of this, all right? And I wanted to bring this one up as well, because this shows, to me, I also believe that the leading Pharisees and the teachers, the lawyers during the time of Yeshua, would have also been very acquainted with Joseph. Joseph, we know, when he first goes there and he gets sold as a slave, the wife of the owner is trying to get him to commit adultery with her. And he runs out. So he did the right thing. His correct action was leaving the situation. But it showed in his heart, because his response is to the wife of his master, how can I commit a sin against my master, but more importantly, against Elohim? So his heart was wanting to be right with Elohim and his master at whatever it cost to himself. We know it cost him in the end. He ends up going to prison for doing the right thing. Okay? But at least his conscience, now his heart, his mind can still have freedom to know I did the right thing, even if nobody understands. Nobody else can see it. He sees it. The Creator, the one who I did this for, he sees what I did. And eventually, right, other people would see it as well, that he did what was right. So, and if we go, the rest of Matthew 5, 6, and 7 talks about other examples. I will read from Matthew 5, 38 to 47. I Levi, yeah. And it just quickly here, just so we have an idea of some more of what the Pharisees were teaching versus what he was trying to point to. The heart. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evildoer, but whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn to him the other also the other. And the one wanting to sue you and take your shirt, let him also have your coat. Whoever forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to the one who asks of you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Even the tax collectors do the same, don't they? And if you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than anyone else? Even the pagans do that, don't they? Therefore, be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect. So throughout this, and the rest of them as well, he's really, the difference is he's focusing on the heart of the matter is more important than the action. And that's, the heart was really also what the Pharisees and the Sadducees wanted. They wanted the heart of everybody so that they would, do everything that they wanted them to do. But yet they weren't doing the things that should have been done as well. He's not saying don't do the physical and do this instead. He's not saying that. He understands from the beginning how he created it. But they had so lost their connection with the heart of the Torah for many different reasons and wanted to be seen as righteous to their own benefit. When Yeshua comes and shows them the reality that they do not want to admit of, their outward actions had replaced the intent of the heart. As long as you looked good, they were happy. When their own actions were making them look righteous on the outside, they could now justify the evil heart that was hidden from their very eyes. And that's what Yeshua was pointing to. Because the doing according to their ways meant Elohim would accept you based on your outward appearance. And so now man took a position that they would never admit to openly. The heart's intention had become lost to the noise in the doing of what they saw as the right actions. So this is might be one of the reasons why many of them could not accept this teaching of Yeshua. For had they accepted it, the reality is it would have broken everything that they had built all of who they are on. It would have come crashing to the ground because people would have realized, oh, so what's important, what is more important is the heart. And so these other things, it's not that they're wrong to do them, but because the heart wasn't in the right place, they were being done to honor the people who wanted the honor instead of giving the honor to Yeshua, to Elohim, who they said the honor is going to. And so thankfully we have many examples of people with the right heart towards Elohim. And you can read these in, didn't put the passage up there, but you can go to Hebrews 11, and it talks about the different people of faith before Yeshua's time, and it also talks about those who, allowed themselves to die after the time of Yeshua. And some are like Abel, whose offering was accepted because his heart was right. Therefore, he did right. Same with Joseph, who ran because his heart was right. And King David, who repented when Elohim confronted his heart with the sins of adultery and murder. And so the last part that I'm going to talk a little about here today is on Matthew 7:28 to 29. And in there, it talks about, because the people were, when they were hearing Yeshua, they were impressed and astonished with how he taught them. He didn't use other rabbis or other Pharisees to prove what he was saying to be true. Okay, he just used the scriptures. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't, or that we shouldn't use other people to help validate what we're saying. We can do that, but the most important validation is that it does come from the scriptures. And so in Yeshua's case, he, as it says here, now when Yeshua had finished these words, the crowds were astonished at his teaching, for he was teaching them as one having authority, and not as their Torah scholars. So I believe that because he was also going straight to the heart, it really resonated with the people a lot more. That they would have been thinking about it, chewing on it, as they say, for a time, and being like, he's saying something. He's focusing on an area that most of the time the Pharisees and the lawyers and the Sadducees don't want you to look at. What is the intent? What is the heart of the Torah? What is the heart of the Tanakh trying to teach me? Is it really all these little, you must do this, you must do that? The washing of the hands, all of these things. Okay, is that really that important to the Elohim of Israel that we serve? That if back then, if a Gentile wanted to join, he had to essentially go through proselytism to the rabbis. So now they would be considered part of Israel. So now they could be seen as, the rabbis and the Pharisees' eyes, they could be seen as righteous in the eyes of the Elohim of Israel. Because that is true. And that's, so when the rabbis and the Pharisees do say that, you can read it where they talk about, them being, righteous in the sight of Elohim. To a certain degree, they're right, because you do have to be part of Israel to be seen as righteous. The problem, again, was they had taken it and made the focus be on them. They had forgotten that originally your faith is what brought you into Israel. Your faith is what people like Rahab and Ruth, again, Caleb, that even, Abel, you look, Abel, Enoch, others, right? Israel's not even existing yet. But because of that faith, they would be part of a people group that Elohim hadn't physically even started bringing into the picture yet at this point, because Abraham's not around. He already knew he was going to do that. But, right, so it's interesting, if you look at that, they are now part of people who are even still waiting for when Yeshua will come through their faith. So it's the same with us, right? And unfortunately, somehow the leading people of Israel had lost that sight. Through their disobedience, they had lost that they were supposed to be the light to the rest of the world, which would be the Gentiles. And so right? We know that eventually that light would be brought out. And what we're doing is I believe, through this, really bringing more of the light of the heart. And because of my heart is right with Yeshua, I now want my actions. Again, going back to the beginning there, the Lord is my strength and my shield. My heart trusts in him. He helps me. My heart leaps for joy, and with my song, I praise him. And so he had such an amazing grasp of the Torah, the Nevi'im and the Ketuvim, and the sayings of the elders of his time, that when they pressed him on any issue from any of the writings, he was able to counter with an argument from their writings. So that's how well he knew. He knew not just what the Tanakh said, he also knew what other rabbis and Pharisees at one time taught, and even of that day were teaching. So that's why they couldn't bring a case of capital punishment against him the right way. They had to do it through false means. So again, they were helping to carry out what Isaiah 52 and 53 said would happen, without them going like, oh, Isaiah 52, 53 says this, let's do it. You know, they weren't consciously thinking, okay, we want to get rid of him because of that. They were doing it without realizing it. And not once did he quote from any of the leading Torah scholars of his time to, again, validate what he was saying, only to show at certain times where he needed to make up the point that even you guys have an understanding of this. So they couldn't refute him. They couldn't say anything. They had to either be quiet, just be quiet and listen, or they would turn around and leave and go and talk about within themselves, what are we going to do to Yeshua? Because we don't like that more people are starting to come to want him more than us. So the people grew in their astonishment to the authority of his teaching. And so that's the rest of the Hayesod chapter 4. So just remember that everything we do, our heart and our mind precedes the action that we take. And may we be a little more like David, wanting to, best we can, honor our Creator, and our heart leaping for joy and praising him with songs. All right, any comments or questions?